Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Szuplat. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs, ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. As a proud GW graduate myself, I can attest that faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. Hello, and welcome to Chief Influencer, the show that features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and noisy world. I'm your host, Anthony Szuplat. And as we wrap up 2024, we want to take a moment to reflect on the incredible guests who've joined us this year. These are the trailblazers, the ones who not only drive their organization's success, but are also using their platforms and influence to make a real lasting impact in the world. From leading major corporations and nonprofits to pioneering bold, innovative solutions, our guests have shared their stories of perseverance, purpose, and vision, reminding us what it truly means to lead with integrity and a sense of responsibility. In this episode, we're reminded of how leaders make an impact and how they influence people around the world. You sure have accomplished a lot. And now at Points of Light, I'd love for you to tell us a bit more about it. And in particular, you have to, like many leaders, but you especially have a range of stakeholders that you have to keep in mind with such a broad network. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the various stakeholders and who are some of the most important ones that you have to figure out as a leader that you're able to influence and serve through your organization.
Yes. Well, I'll start with, we are as you said, you told a little bit about who we are, but we're the largest organization in the world focused on fostering volunteerism and civic engagement. And so it's really, it's an awesome honor and a responsibility to be a legacy organization of a former president. And it's very exciting to have so many stakeholders. So, but in my world, in the nonprofit leadership world, we have board members. So I report and am accountable to a nonprofit board of volunteers. So people that volunteer their time. And they hold the public trust of our charity. And I am their sole employee, and I am, my job is to carry out, their strategic vision and do it ethically and in a way that really honors our mission. So they're a really important set of stakeholders. We also, in an organization that's global, you have a set of affiliates or organizations that have chosen voluntarily to affiliate with you because they align with the values. They want to be a part of an organization that's bigger. They want to learn from their peers, but they have very different needs. And we certainly see that in a global and a U.S. domestic combination, because our philanthropy and giving landscape is very different than in many places around the world. So the way a NGO operates and the needs they have, there's much that's the same. But there is also things that are different, and we can't ignore that. So that's another set of our stakeholders. We also have all the NGOs in the United States that aren't even affiliated with us, but we really do want to be generous and support them, almost open source what we have about fostering civic engagement. And it's so needed right now. We can talk about that if you want. But we have that group as well that are not necessarily affiliated, but we're a part of the family. We're a part of the movement to really unlock the power of human capital to decrease our loneliness epidemic, to address that, to reduce polarization and heal our divides, and to solve local problems. So we're in that unlocking mode, and it takes a lot of partners. So we have a number. one thing that's unique, last thing I just want to share, one thing that's unique, we also have our daily points of light, which are the individual everyday Americans that we recognize every single day, every single weekday, for the extraordinary contributions they're making to their communities. Many of them are social entrepreneurs, they're founders, they've started up a nonprofit to meet a need in their community, and they're amazing. And they're another constituency that we have.
Maybe just say a little bit more about the daily points of light, because I think that that's,
isn't that the coolest thing? So it's if those of you that may remember President Bush's inauguration address in 1989, he talked about 1990 actually. He talked about how he talked about his vision of unlocking service as a definition of a successful life, that every American, really to have a successful life, you need to be serving others. And his vision was that we would see 1,000 points of light. And each person, when they do that, is a point of light. Well, I'm so proud that we have kept that going every weekday since his presidency. And I think I just gave 7,725. We've given over 7,000 Point of Light awards to families, to institutions, to people. And we get so many nominations every year. I hope anybody on this, hearing this podcast would be interested in going to our website and at pointsoflight.org, and you can nominate someone to be a Point of Light. And it is, they are an amazing group of people, and they're social entrepreneurs that we are supporting.
Public Welfare Foundation seeks to catalyze a transformative approach to justice in the U.S. that is community-led, restorative, and racially just by supporting the creation and implementation of an alternative vision of justice that is rooted in communities. I wondered if you could unpack that for us a bit and tell us, who do you need to influence to make that vision a reality?
Yeah, I love that question. Our work is really about taking this issue, as you know, which I think is one of the issues that's going to define this moment in history. And that's how we treat human beings who are in conflict with the law, children and adults alike. There are all these sort of great historical philosophical quotes about sort of like how society's being defined by how they treat, in some respects, the least among us. And I think there's a huge statement in society on how you treat those people that we think have been adjudged as doing something wrong. Our work is very much about tackling those issues. And in America, those are issues that really where the rubber hits the road at the state and local level. So we do work that is centered on identifying 9 sites. We're in the District of Columbia, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Colorado, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Tennessee. And you'll know, just like we didn't pick the easy issues, we didn't pick the good, easy locations. We went to the Deep South, the Midwest, the Rust Belt, where some of those issues are the most difficult and the thorniest. And we're trying to work both on how we think about the choices we make in the justice system right now. Are we too punitive? Do we give people an opportunity to re-enter and get their lives back on track? What does that mean for communities and overall tax base and community health? We're also trying to think about those things like when harm happens, if we don't think that a blunt force, a system that harms in its own way is the right response, what needs to exist in those communities to both be responsive to the harm, but to do it in a proportional way that restores. And so that's the thrust of our work in the sites that we're working in. It's like we have to influence a lot of different stakeholders in doing that work. On the ground in those sites, we're working with coalitions of organizations that are trying to influence grass tops, policymakers at the city level that make decisions about money, policymakers that drive the policy. We're trying to influence media, how they tell the stories of these issues, because they educate the public about what we think about these issues. And that's a very powerful way through which these issues and that work is framed. We're also trying to influence researchers and demonstration projects so that all the alternatives we want to see, we incentivize people to actually create those things so that they can exist. So there are different populations, and we as a philanthropic organization that gives money to other organizations that do good work are also constantly trying to influence our colleagues to say, join us in this fight. This is the way to do it, by driving money to the ground and investing in these organizations to do this work.
Since this show is about influence, I think it's appropriate to start with a big victory you recently had that will have ripple effects for time to come. Can you explain what the county line is in New Jersey for those of us who aren't familiar, and why you fought to eliminate it?
Sure. So New Jersey is just about the last bastion of political machine left in America, and the biggest part of it that has influence there on the side of the machine is that they can affect how the ballot looks. So 49 other states use what's called an office block ballot, which is just traditionally you have the, running for Senate and all the candidates below. In New Jersey, party leaders can actually give preferential placement for their endorsed candidates, so they can give an advantage to someone on the actual ballot, which is kind of just crazy to think about and completely unfair in my opinion. So this is something that I decided that I would file a lawsuit about to try to change. And I think for me, it's a recognition that this isn't just about me and my Senate race here in 2024. This just needs to be fixed, especially as I'm someone who is a member of the Democratic Party that constantly espouses the need to be able to protect our democracy, about fairness and equality in this nation. And I believe that we need to hold true to those values no matter what, and especially to make sure we're not being inconsistent and taking those advantages. If they benefit us, we need to show that we're being consistent across the board.
It takes a lot of influence to show up that way, to improve the lives of millions of people, which is what the foundation does. And I wonder if you could talk about how you think about the importance of influence in your role as president.
It's incredibly important. And I'd say the key lesson for me has really been an evolution over my career. And to just cut to the bottom line, I fundamentally believe that influence has really two key dimensions that are important for me and how I lead, and important for the work that I lead at the foundation. Number one is that it has to be reciprocity. Influence has to be both ways. You have to authentically listen and be open to being influenced as much as you are trying to influence in a specific direction that drives, outcomes. The second one is that influence, from my perspective, is how do you influence directly, but then how do you determine when it's better to empower others to influence and to carry the critical messages? And that's really also fundamental to our work. And, as we get more into the conversation, I'll give you some examples of how we think about that and how I approach that specifically.
Yeah, I love those two pillars. I'm excited to dive into them a bit more. Maybe one way we can kind of move in that direction is I'd love to hear how your relationship with influence and your own personal brand has evolved, because you mentioned that evolution over your career. And I know, you started in public accounting and consulting, and that is perhaps different in a lot of ways than the world of philanthropy and education systems.
Yeah. So, I would say it's been a long evolution over my career from influence as a persona, which is kind of how I started in my professional trajectory, to influence as an authentic leader. And what I mean by that is, as you mentioned, I started in the corporate sector, really in public accounting. And I remember this very distinctively, that the persona and what you projected was really important in that corporate setting and with the clients that we worked in. For example, it ranged from you generally wore white shirts and a tie. And when you were outside of our office, you kept your jacket on. And it was important to project that persona because it instilled confidence in our clients. It showed that we were, had the capabilities and expertise to deliver on our commitments to our clients. And so I was almost imprinted with that idea that influence was about a persona. And as I had varied experiences over my career, I began to appreciate, both through my own experience, but also with colleagues and leaders that I worked with and worked for, that it's really authenticity from my perspective and view that is the most important kind of higher order influence. And it is about being who you are. And I realized that trying to influence with personas was just taking too much work. And it actually wasn't working really. It worked early in my career, but as I had more responsibility in different settings and contexts, it really wasn't an effective strategy. But what was effective, both in terms of just where you spend your time and energy, but also the impact and effective influence, was just being able to show up authentically and to say, I'm going to just be who I am, and I'm going to influence you and be influenced by my authenticity, and I'm going to offer that to you. And my ask is that you influence me through your authenticity. And to me, that was the sweet spot for me personally and in my professional career. And it's how I have defined my leadership and how I hold myself accountable. And, I fundamentally believe that, again, through a series of experiences, experiments, lessons, and learnings that have really influenced my leadership practice.
Chief Influencer, what we want to talk about is how leaders influence others, how that has changed. And I know you speak several languages. How does this idea of influence change when you're switching from German or Swiss German to French or English? Does it make a difference?
It does make a huge difference. The language is the expression of the soul, and it's the expression of culture. And you will never communicate in Japan like you would in the US. The US is the land of amazing, of bragging, of even when you have not much to say, then you have to say it in a rhetorically impeccable manner, because this is the way it's done in the US. Whereas in Switzerland, for instance, you will always tend to be humble, and to, even with your most incredible achievements, you will go like, I think we didn't do too badly. So you have to adapt your communication style to the country you're in. So I did not communicate in Rwanda, where I was ambassador to Rwanda. Rwanda is a country where you never say things very openly. It's always a way to go around the topic. I didn't communicate in Rwanda the way I'm communicating in the US. And the reason why Marcellus, my chief communication officer, and I have been working in a very American way is because in the end, my audience here is an American audience. I'm not speaking to this, which from time to time gets me in trouble back home, because they go like, he's not communicating like a Swiss. Of course I'm not. I'm not speaking to the Swiss. I'm speaking to the Americans. And wherever you go, you have to adapt. And speaking the language makes a huge difference, because very soon you and I will be able to buy these little small apps, and we'll be able to speak with anyone from Papua New Guinea to Kazakhstan, and the app will translate. But it's not translating the culture and the soul. It's just translating what was said. So wherever I go, I try to learn the language, because it will help me understand much more in depth what other people I'm talking to.
So mutual funds was this like solid choice. And that's how I got started. And I feel like it's a very strong brand that people understand. But now there are a lot of other acronyms and things out there. And I guess part of what you have to do is help people, lots of different stakeholders, understand why the mutual fund is such an important cornerstone of investing. So can you kind of talk about that from a standpoint of communicating with, you have to get your message out to people like when I was that high school kid looking to start my first investment, as well as senators and members of Congress and folks in the White House and more and more. So I'd love to hear how you sort of adapt your message across all of those different stakeholder groups that you have to reach.
So you've put your finger right on, I think, the hardest part of the job. Finance is not something people want to spend a lot of time thinking about. Most people, they want to play with their kids, they want to do their hobbies, they want to go out to eat, they want to enjoy life. And try to engage people in a conversation about finance is really hard to do. it's a bit like brushing your teeth. It's something people know they need to think about because making sure you have financial security is so important today. But it's not something people enjoy talking about or enjoy thinking about. It's very technical. There are a lot of acronyms, a lot of jargon. It seems really complex. In talking about mutual funds and your story about your first job and being told to invest in mutual funds is exactly why we wanted to begin with mutual funds. Today, the mutual fund is merely one of many different investment fund products people can use. There are things called ETFs today. There are target date funds. There are closed-end funds. There are collective investment trusts. I mean, the list can go on. But because people have heard about mutual funds, we often want to begin the conversation with something that they have some familiarity with. And that's why we talk about mutual funds. It's accessible, people understand it. It's something that I think is very intuitive. And once we get people to talk about mutual funds, then we can also then introduce these other products. And they have a basis to understand what these other products do. So that's really kind of been our strategy. I think whenever you try to communicate a complex technical topic, you try to first start off with something that people do understand. And then you say, okay, well, I think we all can understand this first concept. And then you start adding complexity, adding technical detail, and people are able to follow what you're saying. So that's been our strategy when we talk about mutual funds.
After the assassination and during that terrible time, many said that Ben's was a source of hope and that you helped the community get through it. And I want to read a quote that's struck me from an author, Blair Rubel. She said, people needed a place to decompress after 68. They needed a safe and free place to meet, eat, and enjoy one another. Ben's set the tone for the rest of the city and the country. All are welcome at Ben's. That should be the standard everywhere.
Well, it did become that gathering place. You know, it was a place where people felt safe and people felt wanted and people had someone to come and listen to their problems. And I could share mine with them as well. So it was that, it did turn out to be a wonderful gathering place. I love it to now.
Yeah, many people love it.
Yeah, it's been amazing for me that it's been thought of this way for so long. But I'll be 91 years old in December. I still go every day because I enjoy being there. Yeah, I enjoy being there and meeting my guests and exchanging words with them and finding out, like Bernard said, where they're from and why you're here and the whole bit. And I share my story with them. And it's a wonderful feeling to have been able to have that kind of response from the public and from this beautiful city who's also been there to support us. You know, I can't say anything but Washington is a beautiful city. We went through some very difficult times, many, many years of difficult times, but we are a beautiful city again.
You've had a successful family-owned business now for 66 years. It's the oldest, same family-owned restaurant in the district. Now it's known around the world. What do you think the secret recipe is for your success?
The people, of course. I think, I grew up in rural Virginia. My father had a big farm, 300-acre farm, and I had these wonderful parents, wonderful, kind, loving parents that instilled in us the importance of treating everybody the way you want to be treated. And they said, when you treat everybody the way you want to be treated, you will never have a problem in life. My family also showed me how they supported the community, how they supported the neighbors, and how they treated people. He set that example for us. My dad in particular set that example for us. I had growing up in a home where there was just a lot of love and caring and enjoying people. I saw them enjoy people, inviting people over, and we going to other people's homes. So I really enjoy people. And my first job was at Industrial Bank, and it was there that I realized, as a commercial teller, how much I enjoyed interacting with different people all day long. I really, really enjoy that. I'm like, oh, wow, I don't want to be in the classroom. I don't want to be in an office. I got to be where there are people. And when Ben comes along, and we fall in love and want to be married, and he wanted to know if I would be kind enough to consider partnering with him in a little restaurant, all I could think of was more people for me to enjoy. So that's how we got started. And, you know, I think when you find a career that you enjoy, it's really not work. And I enjoy people. And when you treat people the way you want to be treated, they come back. And of course, you got to have a good product. We have this great chili, half smokes and burgers and all that, and vegetarian options today. So it was just every day. I mean, it was just every day greeting people and welcoming them in my home and feeling like they're coming into my home. It just kind of works for you. Yeah. When you enjoy what you're doing, it shows. When you enjoy people, they know. You can't fake it. It is one of those things. So, and of course, when you get that career going, you stick with it.
One of the things I think about President Obama that resonated with so many people is his style of communication connected with such a wide audience. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, obviously, we're going to discuss how each of us can influence through our own communication and writing. But in your experience as a White House speechwriter, you had to navigate the challenge of influencing President Obama while also helping him influence the masses through his speeches. I wonder if you could talk about that dynamic.
Yeah, I guess I'd come at it a little differently. I would never say I influenced Barack Obama. He, you know, but I didn't start working for him until a few months after he took office. I was there. By then, you know, by 2009, he had, you know, since 2004, the big speech where he kind of exploded onto the national stage. You know, that's 4 or 5 years of speeches and books and articles. He had his voice. He had his vision. And I think that's actually one of I talk about this in the book. I think we can all tell when a leader hasn't thought deeply about who they are and what they believe, because they're saying one thing one week and another thing the next week. And you just, you know, you can agree with Obama's politics or disagree with his politics. So I think one of the things he was such a good example of, and one of the reasons I wrote the book, is because he had thought deeply about, I think because of his own unique identity, his racial identity, he was forced to kind of think about himself more deeply than most of us do throughout his life. Like, who am I? What am I? What community am I part of? Am I part of more than one community? Where do I fit in? Like, what's my story? You know, he had thought deeply, deeply. And years after the 2004 convention speech, David Axelrod, his advisor, said Barack Obama could not have given that speech if he hadn't thought deeply about his identity over many years and how his story fit into the story of America. And so one of the things I encourage in the book is that all of us can think about these big existential questions. You know, before we get up and stand up in front of an audience and expect them to believe in us and be inspired by us, we have to believe in ourselves. We have to know what we're about. And that raises some big questions. And I think this is one of the reasons why so many people fear public speaking, is because, you know, well, what if I get judged? Well, when you're confident in who you are, you know what you believe, you know what you stand for, maybe what other people think about you doesn't matter so much. And I will say, you know, take Barack Obama's 2004 speech, the big one, the first one, put it against his farewell address, and you will see thematic consistency. And that's the sign of a leader who knows who he is, knows what they believe, knows what they stand for. And so those fundamentals shouldn't change over time. And that's something we can all do.
Yeah. I'm really excited to get your story out there to other leaders and other folks who are really focused on influence. And, you know, I wanted to just start by asking you, Chuck, as the chief executive officer of the ADA, I know you have to influence a lot of different stakeholders. This has come together as it relates to increasing access to diabetes technologies and treatments. I wonder if you could just talk about what it has been like to work with so many different stakeholders to achieve a common goal like that one.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. That's a great question. I often get asked that question, and I have a few different answers, but they all align at the end. But when I think about, what diabetes technologies do, they really arm people living with diabetes to better understand their disease and care for themselves. And this was never more important than it was early in the pandemic when rates of deaths of COVID were so high among those living with diabetes. If I think about a stat, 40% of people that died from COVID had diabetes. And so that's a big deal. And so, from an ADA standpoint, along with our industry partners, medical societies, and other patient groups, we really came together to call on the nation's largest payers, Medicare, Medicaid, to improve the access to life-changing continuous glucose monitoring, or CGMs that we refer to as an acronym. And so the ADA led studies that show that the elderly, people of color, and those of lower socioeconomic means were the least likely to have access to CGMs. And so, we set a mission out to change that. And so we appeal to the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, the VA, the Veterans Administration, and the Department of Defense, just to name a few. We also started lobbying state Medicaid programs. And with that, together, the entire diabetes community, the ecosystem, has made amazing progress in that regard. And so I'm really proud to say today that seniors, veterans, and Medicaid recipients in 34 states have greater access to life-changing devices, which is a huge win, not only for the ADA, but for people living with diabetes. And so the ADA isn't stopping. We, along with our other partners, will absolutely continue to push for greater access to technologies that improves health outcomes, and extend lives. And so, and just a couple more points to piggyback on that question. I do want to point out that the ADA is a member of the National Health Council, and I sit on the NAC's board of directors. And so what that is, and I really think highly of that organization and their CEO. And so the ADA shares the NAC's goals of reducing utilization barriers that impair access to technology and treatments for millions of Americans who could benefit from them. The 38.4 million people living with diabetes. And so another important step is that, we can be eliminating or regulating practices that prevent patients from obtaining those technologies or treatment that are prescribed for them. And so why should we make patients jump through hoops to get what their doctors think is the best for them? And so, I know a lot of those practices have a goal of saving money, but they also put patients at risk for developing serious complications that require ER visits and hospitalization. And then when I think about not keeping pace with new tech, especially age, people of color, or low income is a major concern of the ADA. And so we know that these populations lag behind in terms of coverage. And so as a result, these populations have a higher incidence of deadly complications, to be 100% transparent. And so, for instance, people of color are at a much higher risk of having diabetes-related amputation, and that the majority of these are preventable. And so how people are treated, the access they get is often tied to the age, the color, and their income. And so it's not right. And the ADA is committed to reversing those trends through education, awareness, and advocacy.
You do a lot of work around mental health. In fact, you've been recognized for the work that you've done throughout your entire career to help the nation rethink its approach to mental health. It's obviously a big topic and affects all of us in one way or the other. And you're a psychologist, a former policymaker. You now run the leading scientific and professional organization representing psychology. So I wanted to start by asking you, who are some of the people you have to influence to change the way that all of us think about mental health?
Well, that's a great question, because it really boils down to everyone. The fundamental shift that I think we need in our view of mental health is moving from thinking about mental health as about a group of people, those people who have mental illness, and sometimes people even use the term the mentally ill, to really thinking about mental health as something that affects all of us. And in fact, during the pandemic, it was the first time in my career that I really saw the entire population understand that mental health isn't just about someone over there, it's about all of us. And the fundamental shift really comes out of my work in the public sector, where I was working with people who have very serious and challenging problems, often without a lot of resources. So it's kind of counterintuitive that you would think that the best way to help those individuals is to widen our definition of mental health. But the reality is the way we approach this issue is we have to have a diagnosis. We wait until people often are in crisis. And because of that, we don't intervene earlier. The reality is that mental illness is not just about a person or a group of people. It's something that affects all of us. And the best way to think about it is that on one end of the continuum are people who have great mental health, they have great psychological health. At the other end of the continuum are people who are struggling, have very serious challenges. And all of us are somewhere on that continuum. And over the course of our lives, we move up and down that continuum. Sometimes some of us move to the point where we need professional help. But the way we approach mental health is we approach it as a binary issue. Either you have it or you don't. And if you don't have it, then there are literally no resources that can be used to help you. And if you do have a mental illness, if you cross that magical line, then there are resources. And the problem with that is that it really means that we can't intervene at the earliest possible moment, that we don't have resources for people who are at the early stages of their illness, or for people who where we can prevent mental illnesses and prevent people from having more serious problems. So that's a big shift in the way we think. And really to get there, we have to influence a lot of different people. We have to think about policy people who set the policies around what gets paid for. We have to think differently in the field. So all of us who've been trained under that binary model have to be taught to think differently about how we can help people. We have to influence the general public, because general public is very important in a population health approach, because one of the strategies that we employ is this idea of enlisting people from the community to help create psychologically healthy communities and environments. In the same way we think about our physical health, most of us know that if we diet, we do exercise, we do those kinds of things, that we're generally going to be healthy. Those messages are directed at the public, because if we can get the public to do those things, then we can be healthier. And in the same way, we have to do that for mental health.
And that brings us to the end of today's special episode, where we've celebrated the incredible voices and expertise of some truly inspiring individuals, our chief influencers. Their stories of vision, resilience, and impact remind us that leadership is about more than just results. It's about creating a legacy that inspires and empowers others to do the same. We hope you've gained valuable insights and feel inspired to make your own impact, whether you're leading a company, helping to communicate stories of impact yourself, or building something from the ground up. A huge thank you to all of our guests for sharing their wisdom with us this year. And thank you to you, our listeners, for your support. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a Chief Influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time.